We're 1 week away from the trade deadline. The Bucks figure to be one of the more interesting teams. What should they do? What type of players should they target? And is there one singular thing that the Bucks should focus on at the deadline? Camille and I weigh through the options coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can subscribe to get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Sign up for free at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, LockedOnDaily.com to get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Well, a rarity here, Camille, that the Bucks have 2 days off in between games. They've returned home, too, in an even stranger feeling of, hey, this is what it's like to sleep in our own bed before departing for San Antonio later today to take on the Spurs tomorrow night. But 1 week from today is the NBA trade deadline. So February 6th, 2 p.m. Central Time is when the deadline hits. As we've seen in the past, a 2 p.m. deadline means, depending on how busy the day is, we'll start to get finalizations and a few moves trickling in at like 2:15. You and I are planning on handling it similar to we did last year, where we'll be on in the afternoon, probably shortly after the deadline ends, to recap what had happened, even if the Bucks don't do anything, how the moves impact the Bucks. And I think we may have a guest joining us for that one as well. But in the meantime, we figured, since there's been a lot of chatter in the live chats of the shows that we've done recently here, opening it up to the audience and those of us that are with us here on the live show, what you think the Bucks need to do. We obviously have our opinions, but it could be specific players. It could be, I think we'll probably keep it to positional players and needs and cap-related things that the Bucks can get into. So feel free to throw your ideas out there in the chat, and we will address those as we get through the show. But let's just kick things off here. Looking at positional needs, Camille, we've talked about it a couple of times this season. Let's take the assets out of it for a moment here. And if I just told you, what area do the Bucks need to improve as they move into the playoffs, where would you start?
I would start with an athletic big. That's where I've been going to throughout the conversation around the Bucks and the trade deadline and what they might do. I think being able to have a more defensive, versatile big that you could throw out there next to Giannis, if possible, in those situations where you need another big that can guard the perimeter, get back, so on and so forth. So I think that type of big would be really helpful. I've had conversations about like the Bobby Portis type of big, where it's like the more scoring punch off the bench, and how that version of a big off the bench fit previous iterations of the Bucks a bit better, just given how defensive first that they were. Being able to have that scoring punch off the bench helped a lot. But I think that now with the team having Dame, with them having Giannis, and just having that offensive firepower there in that starting lineup, that having somebody that's more defensive focused would be a really, really nice piece for the Bucks to add. What about you?
So there's, obviously 3 areas I think of need for the Bucks, and one, maybe 2 of them, are pretty much shared league-wide. I would probably agree that a more defensive-minded big would be close to the top of the list. I think the complications with that are, with your assets, I don't know what you can get there. Not that you can't get somebody that's more defensive-minded and switchable as a big, but I don't know that you're going to get someone that would be like a closer for you. And in closing lineups, it's more of a, like we've seen on this road trip so far, when you're down to just 2 bigs, you don't have very many options. And Doc Rivers talked about that again after that Blazers loss of, look, there's only so much we can do when we got 3 bigs and 1 is out. I think that, and we've already got one suggestion coming in as we've brought up bigs, Robert Williams.
Yeah, that's a popular one.
I'd love to have Robert Williams, right? I don't think the Bucks assets line up with what Portland is going to be looking for, unless Joe Cronin says, you know what? We really loved sticking it to Miami last year. Let's do you guys another solid. We'll take back something for Robert Williams. So just give us whatever you got. I think it would probably be more of a 4-2 that you'd be looking at, and not necessarily Robert Williams, because we've talked about it before. Giannis, ideally, you don't want Giannis to be playing the 5 for the whole game, but you can kind of pick and choose your moments, especially with Brook Lopez. And if you have somebody that can play the 4-5 where he and Giannis are kind of interchangeable, that's, I think, what I would be targeting more so than just a traditional Robert Williams is your 5. But yeah, I would probably lean towards more of a defensive-minded athletic big as the prime target. The other 2 that I referenced, I still do think they could use another creator and ball handler. I mean, we've seen Rollins really grow so far this season. It's still not a natural fit for him, and Doc has talked about this too. He's not a point guard. We're teaching him how to be a point guard, but he's more of a combo guard. And, I think the Bucks have gotten better at it, but we've seen throughout the season they have struggled offensively in moments when Damian Lillard is blitzed and double teamed. And it's Dame, it's Khris, it's Giannis. I mean, those are your ball handlers on this team. So I think you could use some help there. And then the one that just about every team has on their list is you'd love another, like a Taurean Prince type, an athletic, switchable wing, bigger wing, where you could play small, even if you don't get a big, and you say, okay, we got Taurean Prince, maybe Khris Middleton, this new player that we add as well. Like, potentially we're building up a war chest of bigger bigs that we can throw out there, where Giannis is our 5 and our only big out there. And we've got switchable guys that can take on some of those other assignments.
You can never go wrong with having switchable wings on your team. 3-and-D wings is always going to be something that any team could use, any team could need. To your point about another shot creator, secondary ball handler for the Bucks, I agree that they do need that, and which makes the whole Ryan Rollins aspect of it really interesting. And hearing Doc Rivers talk about how they're trying to teach him how to play the position. They're also looking to teach AJ Johnson how to also play that point guard position. So it's like, for this season, if you are looking to push your chips into a certain degree, go for that championship, it's like, how much confidence do you have that Ryan Rollins is going to be ready to make that step this year? And it's not to discredit what we've seen from him already, because I've been an advocate, you've talked about it, trying to find him a full roster spot going forward, so that, he's not on a 2-way contract anymore. You can kind of keep him on the roster going forward. So it's like, I can see the picture of Rollins, a lot that I like about his game. But if you're trying to win a championship this year, is he going to be able to step into that position? And at this point in the season, I don't know if that is the case. So I can definitely see the appeal of trying to go and get another ball handler. I did see this morning, I'm not sure how legit it is, but just, the rumor mill is turning at this time with the trade deadline a week away. But like, I saw Jose Alvarado's name thrown around for the Bucks, and I was like, that's different. Wouldn't have thought about that. But just another type of guard to be able to kind of go out there and work. But I definitely feel you on the another shot creator aspect of it.
I mean, and I suppose that's the other important thing is I didn't think about that, to target those types of teams, like obviously the teams that are down there in the standings, like the Raptors, the Hornets, the Wizards. You could kind of pick over the carcass on those teams, but the Pelicans, another team that probably didn't anticipate being sellers coming into this season, they're going to be there. The Blazers as well. You wouldn't know it in the 2 games against the Bucks, but the Blazers are one of those teams. And I don't want to say close the point, but to just add this on the Robert Williams front, he's got 2 years left on his contract, this year and next year. He is making $13.2 million next year, $12.4 million this year. So in theory, you could do a 1-for-1 trade in Bobby Portis for Robert Williams, because Bobby is making just slightly more than Robert Williams. I haven't looked at where the Blazers are at. I believe they should be under, and yes, they are under. So the other thing to keep in mind with all this, and that was kind of the point of this, of, hey, throw out your ideas. We'll talk through, well, they can't do it because of this, or this would line up. I think we're all pretty well versed in what the second apron means, but also keep in mind, if you take back more money than you send out, So like in this trade with the Blazers, hypothetically, you are hard capped at the first apron. So you got to make sure that that team that you're trading with, if, hey, we're giving them $2 million more, even if it doesn't mean you're getting under the second apron, that's going to hard cap them at the first apron. So keep an eye on that as well. So continue to throw your ideas out there. I think we know the gist of what a lot of Bucks fans are looking to unload, but are there any specific players that you are targeting or you think that the Bucks should target? We'll continue to address those. But coming up next, I do want to discuss what's actually available for the Bucks to throw out there. Not necessarily players. We can get into that, but the other assets that the Bucks have in terms of draft capital. We'll get into that conversation coming up after this here on Locked On Bucks. Well, this next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by TurboTax. That's right, our friends at Intuit TurboTax sponsoring this message here. Taxes waiting and wandering and wondering if you're going to get any money back, as we're all starting to fill those out, then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with TurboTax Expert, who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All you can get, so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, Camille, the assets that the Bucks have available or may not have available, I suppose we should go through that, as we know the players that have all been kicked around here, and we've seen the same names start to surface in the chat. But the Bucks, look, the difficulty is they don't really have much to offer. You have players that are going to probably be more appealing at the deadline next year, assuming that they pick up their player options, and then that becomes dead money and expiring contracts that you can offload. But I think 2026 and what, as we've learned, may actually benefit the Bucks some, is the summer of 2026 is when teams are gearing up for cap space, for the potential of free agents that are going to hit then. Miami Heat were the first team that's already made it pretty visible and vocal of, we're just not taking on money past 26. So we have cap space for free agents then. The players that we've oft discussed for the Bucks line up with that, where their money would come off the books in 2026. So it's probably not quite as much of a stumbling block for the Bucks as we initially imagined, but you still need to kick in some assets. And that's where the Bucks come into some issues. So this 2025 first round pick is gone, either to the Nets or the Pelicans. Next year's first round pick, you can't trade because you're pick swapping that with the Pelicans. The 2027 first round pick is gone to the New Orleans Pelicans. Your 2028 first round pick is pick swapped with the Portland Trail Blazers. Your 2029 first round pick goes to the Portland Trail Blazers. And your 2030 first round pick is a pick swap to the Portland Trail Blazers. So 2031 is it in terms of first round picks that you can deal with. We've talked about, you get under the second apron, you got 2031 and 2032 at your disposal this summer. I think the tricky part is, and by the way, second round picks, there's even fewer that the Bucks have. 2031 pick is what they have. And, we heard last week in that trade the Suns made that a lot of teams viewed the 2031 pick, especially unprotected, first rounder by the Suns, as the best asset that was out there. If that's the case, this is the best asset that could be made available then. And I think many would argue I'd rather have the Bucks 2031 unprotected first than the Suns, because who knows, maybe Devin Booker sticks around, or you add some more players and guys are willing to go to Phoenix, and the roster's older with Milwaukee. So in theory, this is it if you make this available. I think I'm kind of torn on what to do with that, and I'm curious your thoughts, because I believe as long as number 34 is here, who cares about 2031? Like, this guy's rewarded you with his loyalty. You got to do everything you can and make sure no stone is unturned in terms of the assets that you have and moves that you can make to make sure you are a winner when he's here. Because when he is gone, it's probably going to be rough, as we experienced in the lead up to Giannis getting here. So, look, I get the hesitation over, we can't literally give away everything. It's going to be pretty lean when this group is gone. It's going to be lean when this group is gone regardless. And I just lean more and more towards, yeah, I would be willing to part with that in the right move. It's not for a role player. It's not for, oh, if we can get Robert Williams, here's our 2031 unprotected first. Like, it has to be a guy that's not a rental, a guy that's going to be here for a couple of years and is in the, age range we've heard with some other players, like your Zach LaVine's, not Jimmy Butler either. Somebody that's in their late 20s or so that you feel like, okay, if we have this player in Giannis, we got a foundation, and we know we have Dame, but the age of those two guys, I'm willing to part with the 2031 for a move like that.
I would too, if it's the right guy in that situation, somebody, as you mentioned, who could be here, someone who's going to be a game changer. Because during this era, like, one of the fun things about the NBA is just seeing different teams at different stages and where they are and trying to compete for a championship. And for the Bucks, as soon as like Giannis really ascended into being the MVP, defensive player of the year type of guy that he has been, top 75 player of all time, at that point it becomes, okay, we need to do whatever we can to keep our window open. And we understand that young players necessarily don't contribute to winning immediately. So, like, I saw a comment come through earlier asking, like, why doesn't Leon Robbins get any minutes? And it's the same type of conversation around why it took so long for some of the young guys.
You really heard that?
Oh, it was in there. You can scroll back. It's in these comments right here on this YouTube live that we're doing here. But the thing with younger players is that you normally need to get them on the floor, and they're going to make mistakes. They need the reps to continue to get better. And when you're competing for a championship, a lot of the times you don't have enough time to be as patient as you need to for their on-court development, to give them enough minutes to continue developing in a way that could be substantial for that particular season, which is why you see like a Washington Wizards team with all the young guys just getting a bunch of minutes right now, necessarily not leading up to winning. You can argue roster construction around those young guys too, but the point is just that it can be difficult for young guys to come in and immediately contribute. So it's like the Bucks aren't necessarily doing a 2 timeline thing, but they do have some young guys who they're trying to develop in the background while also having the vets. It's a really interesting mix of guys on the team. So with all that being said, I would actually kind of be into the Bucks doing what we just saw Phoenix do, which is trade that first round pick and turn that into 3 more first round picks to be able to navigate if you want to try to make some moves there. Of course, it's like you're not getting the full value of that 1 draft pick that you're trying to trade to get more additional ones for, but it offers you flexibility to be able to make some additional moves. And I would enjoy the Bucks being able to have that level of flexibility while they're still in this window with Giannis, trying to chase championships, being able to just put their hat in the race for a few more different moves. Because when the Bucks got PJ, when the Bucks got Giannis, or when they got Drew, when they got Dame, I did not expect for the Bucks to be able to land those guys in particular. And John Horst has done some good work flipping assets to be able to try to bring in some star power. So that's probably the route I would want to see the Bucks go with that 31 draft pick that they have. See if they can find a way to get more draft picks out of that and then use that to try to continue to improve the team.
Yeah, we just saw somebody mention Cam Johnson too. I would obviously love to have Cam Johnson on this team. I just think, even having said that, 2031 first rounder for the Bucks, if you make it unprotected, is very likely the best asset that is out there on the market this year. I still feel like other teams have more to offer in terms of, we may not have that, but we have multiple firsts that we can give you. And salary that expires this year too. I mean, the Nets don't really care because they got a ton of cap space coming up this summer. So they're one of those teams. I think Detroit is in there as well that'll say, okay, we'll house some bad salary for a year, but again, it's going to cost you. So in those types of moves, I see your point on what if we turn this one into 3 first round picks and then we divvy it out. It takes away big time.
It does.
Because, I mean, look at the picks that the Suns got. They're not going to be great. The one, it's what, the Jazz, I think, the Rockets, and whoever else it
The
was.
Cavaliers, I think, is one of them too.
Cavs, the
It's
worst
gonna
of those
be
picks.
bottom
So,
end of the first round.
so it's 30 this year or 29 this year with the Cavs going to be the worst of that. And 27 is probably going to be the same thing. So yeah, it's first round in name only, probably.
Yeah.
That's the thing for me is like, that is the ultimate sweetener that the Bucks could throw in there. But again, it can't just be for anything. It's like, well, fine, we'll get this. I heard this discussed. I can't recall where. And there's one other trade you and I were talking about on the Dunked On podcast, which we'll get to in a second here. But the one that I heard discussed the other day of, hey, what about this? Was the Utah Jazz that, as we mentioned, trader Danny Ainge is always looking to do like, sure, give me your assets and I'll take on this. The Jazz are you get the impression gonna do something here. Now the Lauri Markkanen thing was kind of confusing of you can't trade him this year. So I guess what's the plan here? But they have some other guys they would love to move. And I heard this kicked around by one of the NBA insiders of what about a package of John Collins and Collin Sexton? The Bucks have the contracts to make that work. Kind of an awkward spot for me to suggest players being traded, but I mean, you do the math, the same three names that have oft been discussed here for the Bucks and Bucks fans. That would work salary-wise. The Jazz would want that 2031 first-round pick unprotected. So is that too much in your mind to say, here's the salary that works? We're getting back an athletic big in John Collins, who, say what you will, but he can knock down shots and he can rebound. He's not a closer for you. Bobby Portis isn't a closer for you either. So is he going to be the perfect replication of it? Maybe not, but I think he checks a lot of the boxes. And Collin Sexton, who would give you the other piece of you need somebody else that can kind of handle the ball and be a shot creator there. It's interesting to me, but I don't know that either of those guys are on the level that I would say 2031 unprotected. Here you go. Take it.
That's where I was like, I like it if it didn't have to include that 31 draft pick for the Bucks, but it doesn't move me enough to be able to part with that singular draft asset alone to bring those two back. Like if that's the route that you're going of using that pick to try to bring someone back, then I would want somebody more in that, Cam Johnson or Zach LaVine type of range where it's like, here's somebody who could really be an exciting third option for your team going forward. So for me personally, I would pass on that particular one. And if so, I would want to use that to get somebody who could bring a little bit more in, I would say.
To me personally, that's a move I would be open to in the scenario that you discussed that Phoenix did. If you turn that 2031 pick into multiple picks, or at the very least, like if we're giving you the 2031 unprotected first, we need a first round pick and maybe a second rounder or a couple second rounders back in addition to this. But yeah, I would lean towards no on that one. The interesting one that you and I were talking about earlier this week on the Dunked On podcast, they do their mock trade deadline every year. And they just had to do an addendum to it with the De'Aaron Fox news. So I haven't caught that part yet, but they had an interesting trade that they worked out for the Bucks. So we'll get into that, get the audience's thought on that one. But larger discussion here. What is the number one priority? We've talked about positional needs, cap-wise. Are we overthinking this? Camille and I will get into that conversation as we start to wrap up what could potentially happen for the Bucks here at the trade deadline coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about Game Time. Attending NFL games is an unforgettable experience. It brings fans together. I attended countless Green Bay Packers games this season, playoff games for the Packers as well, an unforgettable experience. I remember the excitement and energy of every playoff game I attended last year, and even basketball playoff games. It's just right around the corner, the energy in that building at Fiserv Forum. You always look forward to making new memories each and every season. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I recently used Game Time Picks to find tickets for a couple of upcoming events here. As we mentioned, it's not just sport, concert, comedy, theater. any of those events, our beloved Sweet Science in the Squared Circle, WWE. I use Game Time to get some tickets to see Goose next week. I'm also using them to go see Tim Heidecker and Madison later on this evening. The Super Deal is especially impressive because they offer the best value for the event. The app's features give you seat views before you buy. You see the all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout. It makes the experience smooth and reliable. And the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantees give you peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Camille. Before we move off to the high, 30,000-foot view of,
Yes.
Are we overthinking? Maybe this is the number one priority. We mentioned the Dunked On podcast, so their mock trade deadline. So the way they do it too, if you're not a subscriber, each of their 4 or 5 guys on there will handle a couple of teams. As you're the GM and you just start calling around, okay, this player's available. Hey, I'm the Bucks. I would be willing to offer this. And once it's done, they talk through, do we like this deal? For the Bucks, they made a trade for a wing player, a bigger wing, who is probably known more for his offense. Not probably, is known more for his offense than his defense. The trade that they came up with was the Bucks, and I remember texting with you about this. Do you remember the other assets? So it was the names that we've mentioned quite a bit here. But while we look up the assets that were going out to the Bucks, the player coming back to Milwaukee was Brandon Ingram.
BI. And the move that they proposed it for was Middleton, Connaughton, Beauchamp in the 31 unprotected first for Brandon Ingram. And then the Bucks would agree to a 3-year, $120 million extension with BI with that move. So when you first sent me what they were proposing on the show as a mock trade for the Bucks, my first reaction was, man, I feel like I might have some personal bias because of how I view Brandon Ingram's game. But my first instinct was like, not a big fan of moving those assets for Brandon Ingram. And on top of that as well, like, I know there's been a lot of conversation around the health of Khris Middleton and how he's been performing. But Brandon Ingram is somebody as well who has not been the healthiest over the last few seasons. So that's another concern in addition to just the on-court fit that I have with Brandon Ingram.
Yeah, to put it mildly, so he played 64 games last year. The year before that, he played 45 games. The year before that, he played 55 games. The year before that, which was a 72-game shortened season, he played 61 games. So it was really up until around COVID that he was, missing about 10 or so games a year. But in the last 3 years, it's really exploded. And he is young. He's 27 years old. So, as we talked about, if you're going to include that first round pick, you would want a guy that is not 30, that is younger. And you can say, we know Giannis is 30. We know Dame is here as long as Giannis is, albeit older, but we want another guy that we can blend in with them that's younger that we feel is going to be here. So he would check that box. But yeah, I just don't know about the fit offensively. I think he's a better facilitator than he gets credit for, kind of like Khris Middleton, oddly enough, that the team assist rate is up in the minutes that he's on the floor, but he's a mid-range guy. So I don't know what that would do for the spacing. It's not that Khris Middleton is a high-volume three-point shooter. I mean, Khris is largely a mid-range guy as well. In many ways, it feels like you're trading for a younger Khris Middleton if you make that move.
Yeah, to a certain degree, except you're erasing the years of chemistry that has been built with Giannis, which I think gives Khris an edge in a lot of different categories for me of just how comfortable him and Giannis are on the court together, how they don't necessarily even have to seem to think when they're on the court together or finding one another. But it bears the question of, and see, I had to pause because every dayers know how I feel about Khris Middleton. One of probably my favorite Bucks player of all time at this point. So the question comes down to me again of like, is this version of Khris Middleton that we have right now on this Bucks team good enough for this team to get to where they want to go in the playoffs? Is he going to be a valuable piece for this Bucks team for championship aspirations? And at this point, I am really confused on what the answer to that particular question is because of so many other outside factors. He's still working back from the ankle surgeries. It hasn't been super coherent every time he's been on the court. When he was reinserted back into the starting lineup, you had Giannis and Dame coming back with some, illnesses. It didn't look right. Then he goes back to it's just been so many moving pieces. So it's like, is what you can get from Khris Middleton in 2025 going to be good enough, or would somebody like a Brandon Ingram be an upgrade over him? Even though I think BI's only played like 15, 18 games so far this season. Yeah. He's been out most of the year so far. So again, the questions about availability come up as well.
So you're saying it's like when your best friend tells you they're in love with you. If like, I don't know how I feel about this, and is this going to be better for me or not? I look, and there's two things. There are two comments coming in that I want to address. Not the one from Ron, by the way.
Oh no, we're going to address that comment from Ron. Hey guys, it's Justin's birthday today. If you're in the comments, spam it up. Happy birthday, Justin.
This one of, hey, just move on from Khris. It's over. Yada yada yada. Like, we both talked about the difficulty of like, I don't know what to believe yet, right? Like what we've seen in the past, how much, hey, it's the third option. And that's the complication of all of this with Khris Middleton. But the overall notion of it's over, get rid of him. Okay, fine. If that's the case, and it very well may be, but if that's the case, what is the value that you're going to get back from him? Like, do you think the Bucks are the only team that realizes this, if that's the case? So that's the challenge of, that's where the 2031 pick would come into play. And again, it just feels like you don't want to make a move out of need and say, well, we just got to move on, because when you do that, you're probably not getting back the value that you would need in return. And again, you're going to have to attach assets. So you're going to give up that 2031 first round pick. That's as difficult as we said it is for us to hash through the feelings of, I don't know how to feel about this. I mean, imagine what it is for John Horst and the rest of the front office, where they have a week to come up with an idea of, do we think we can get to where we need to be and he can get back to that level that he's been at before the end of the season, before the playoffs begin, really, because that's the most important thing. Look, even if it takes until mid-March and, all right, he's there, all right, fine. But we don't know if that's going to be the case. And you got a week to figure this out in the meantime. The other one, Josh suggested a trade. This does not work. Like, I know those players dollar for dollar basically work for the Bucks, but they're in the second apron. They have to get out of the second apron to aggregate deals. So you got to come up with about another $6 or $7 million in that trade, that his proposal of Jeremy Grant and Robert Williams for Middleton and Bobby Portis and a first or 2 second-round picks. The Bucks don't have 2 second-round picks to give up either. That's the other part. So that trade would not work. You'd have to add in another contract. And then again, if you're asking Portland, take on these 3 contracts for an additional year, that's becoming the 2031 unprotected first-round pick. And plus, look, as much as we both mentioned the name of Robert Williams and talking about you'd love to have another athletic big, look at the conversation we just had about Khris Middleton, Brandon Ingram. The same applies to Robert Williams. So do you feel confident in that being your move? And Jeremy Grant as well. He has not been the same guy since he won that, or since he had that big breakout. He wasn't on the championship team, but the bubble team with the Denver Nuggets. That, to me, those two are not the guys to give up a 2031 first-round pick for it, especially if Time Lord becomes your third big. Can you rely on him to be healthy?
Yeah, he hasn't made it to that finish line in the playoffs for quite some time here. But this comment from Chewy, so let's stick with what we have for another first-round exit. Listen, the question right there is, do you think that this team, as currently constructed, is good enough to win a championship? and it needs some things to happen. We've talked about Khris Middleton's health and how he's integrated back into the lineup and his role in the rotation. If you believe in all of that stuff, like, hey, I think by March, end of February, like, I think Khris is going to be good to go. If the Bucks were going to do, I seem like to know if people don't believe it, they're not good enough yet without the trade. And I respect that opinion. Coming into the season, I was thinking this is like a last dance to a certain degree for this group of Bucks fans or this Bucks team.
Yeah.
And if that is the case where it's a first round exit or another early exit, my thought was like, hey, in the offseason, blow it up, figure it out in the offseason, blow it up at that point and move forward from there. I'm not sure if a drastic move in the middle of the season would be good enough for this year going forward. And Ron added in the comments as well, they aren't good enough with the trade. So if that is how some might feel like this season, hey, they're not gonna be able to do it even with an in-season trade. Is it worth doing it now? Or should you just wait until the offseason when you have a little bit more at your disposal to try to make a move?
Yeah. I mean, I would still lean towards, at least I feel like at this point, if there is an impact player that is open to you, that you can get, and even if it means the 2031 first round pick, like this is a player, I don't care if they're 30 on the dot, but 30 or younger, and you feel like this is the perfect number 3 for our group, I will make that trade. Because Ron's other point of, the health was the reason for the first round exits. Now, neither of us are suggesting the Bucks were going to push the Celtics last year or come out of the Eastern Conference, but if they're healthy, I don't think they're a first round exit again. They weren't fully healthy against Miami. Giannis didn't miss the entire series, but Giannis missed 2 games in that series and clearly wasn't the same. And as we all learned, there was a lot going on off the court during that series as well. So yeah, we're not saying, hey, if the Bucks are healthy, they win a championship these last 2 years. No, but they're not a first round exit these last 2 years. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I suppose who cares, right? Because you're not winning a championship and you're not getting to the finals. But the further you go, you at least have a puncher's chance. And the further you go, the chances are you've got the best player on the floor in Giannis if he is healthy. And that just has not been the case in each of the last 2 postseasons. We're way over time here, but I just wanted to squeeze in one thing. To me, look, if there is no move out there, and this, I guess I would follow that this is the number one most important thing to do. If you can't get that impact player that we've talked about, at the very least, and this is where I suppose it would come into play of, all right, let's do what Phoenix did and turn this 2031 first rounder into 3 first round picks or 2 first rounders in a couple of seconds. You have to get under the second apron. Yeah. So it's $6.2 or so million that you got to shed to get under that. We've all seen the cap sheet for the Bucks, the players that would help get you to that spot. But if nothing else happens and the Bucks say, we're going to stand pat, at the very least, you're that close. You have to make that move just because of what it opens up for you in the offseason where you could use the taxpayer mid-level. And look, we've talked about that mid-tier is dead, but you can get, look at the vet minimums that the Bucks signed this offseason. Well, can we get a guy just a sliver better than him if we're giving a couple $1 million more with the taxpayer mid-level? You can also use that in trades too. If you don't use it in the offseason, you could take back salary in a deal and say, well, we'll just use our taxpayer mid-level for this and ship nothing out. So it opens up countless things for you. It goes a long way to make sure your 2032 is unfrozen. So then you would have that to work with in the offseason as well. So if nothing else, they have to get under the second apron. And I don't even think it would be a bad deadline if, the Bucks do nothing, but they move a contract and they get under the second apron. I'm fine with that.
I would agree with that because I saw a comment come in, I believe it was from Nick, and I completely agree with Nick. Any team with a healthy Giannis and Dame has a chance. And that's all you can ask for right now. Have a chance. And I feel like when I was watching Giannis in that NBA Cup Finals game against the Thunder, one thing that kept coming to mind for me was we have been robbed of watching Giannis in these really big spots over the last 2 years. And I think people can forget how good that he is when those lights get really bright. And Giannis understands it is now or never. And if he is healthy, the Bucks are going to have a shot going forward. I would rather them run with that healthy. I don't think that Khris Middleton needs to average at least 25 in the playoffs for them to win a series at all. I don't think that has to be his role. And I think that if you get there healthy, you got a shot. You got a shot. And I'd rather them try to see what they can get off of that shot rather than mortgaging a future really quick. Just for something that might be a stopgap. Like, again, I'd rather them blow it up in the off season. If they can get there healthy, blow up in the off season, see what you can get from there and go forward.
Yeah, Isaiah Stewart, another name that's been kicked around. I don't think the Bucks have the scratch to go. And fighting. Again, that's another, well, there's that too. That's another one that it's going to require a first round pick for him, because I think he's $15 million. You don't have one singular salary that would match up for him unless it's Khris Middleton. And hey, do you want Khris Middleton back in Detroit? Sure. But what else you got to give us? So I just, those types of players, I think the overall theme is the approach should be, we are willing to use our 2031 first round pick and we'll even make it unprotected, but it's got to be the right player that's coming back for it. It's not a role player. It's somebody that we think is, hey, this is the third guy with this group. And even potentially 2 years from now, if Dame is gone and Giannis is here, this is the number 2 guy on this group for a couple of years. So it's going to be very interesting in this next week here, especially as we kind of tiptoed around the news of De'Aaron Fox now looking for a trade too. So what does that open up on the market with other teams that are willing to move on things? I think, Camille, you're going to see a ton of 3, 4, and 5 team trades. Like a ton is in, you're going to have more of those than you're going to have just this team is trading with this team here because of the cap constraints and what the second apron and first apron has done. Again, where if you take back more money, you're hard capped at the first apron, similar to a sign and trade deal. And of course, we did not mention the biggest name that's out there that I'm not willing to write off just yet, Camille, in terms of the possibility of your guy, the Marquette legend, Jimmy Butler, ending up in Milwaukee, just because every piece of reporting that has come out in the past couple of days is the Miami Heat are basically saying, we are done with this guy. You've been suspended 3 times in a month or so now. We're done. Like, we don't want the headache. We don't want the headache anymore. As long as we're not taking on money past 2026, let us know what you're offering. Like, that opens the door for a team like the Bucks to say, we're not giving you a first round pick, but we'll give you this, this, and this to just be done with the headache. And if nobody else can match that, or maybe Miami says, you know what, Jimmy, you want to go here? Tough. We're sending you here, similar to what they experienced last summer.
I wouldn't put it past Pat Riley and co to do something like that. Now, with them being so desperate to get off of the Jimmy contract and out of this Jimmy situation, we have heard that they have lowered their asking price a bit, which I'm assuming with the assets. So there are other teams that have gotten back into the race, like a Warriors team. So it's something to keep an eye on going forward. But one thing that has been consistent is that the Bucks name has been linked to Jimmy Butler throughout this whole ordeal. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
I just don't think he puts the Warriors at that. Like, great, you're probably still a first or second round exit if you're the Golden State Warriors. And they got to get into the playoff picture to begin with right now. If it's probably an episode in itself, the Jimmy Butler discussion, but if the asking price is significantly lower and you can look at it, if you're the Bucks too, and say, look, if it didn't work, we move on or we make a sign and trade. I mean, you'd be hard capped in the offseason, but you would also have close to more than $50 million with what it's going to cost to get him coming off of your books. So you'd be in a much better spot cap wise going forward too. If this doesn't work and say, okay, we're moving on and we just got rid of $50+ million that it would have taken another year to get rid of. We got Brook Lopez that's expiring. Like, suddenly we feel like we can do something in the offseason. And I mean, it would be fitting for Pat Riley to just throughout this whole saga say, oh, you've said you don't want to go to Memphis. Great. We'll take literally whatever you want, Memphis. He's yours.
You're going to Memphis. Yeah, I could see that too. And it's the question of like, for Bucks fans, I'd love to know what you think as well. Like, would you be willing to give up those assets for a rental of Jimmy Butler if this is not a place where he wants to continue to stay? If it's only for this season, would you still do a Jimmy Butler trade? I'm really curious to know what y'all think.
It's going to be very interesting for the next week. Again, trade deadline next Thursday at 2:00 Central Time. I think we're going to have Frank's thoughts on the deadline. We're trying to work out a date for him sometime early next week. We have something planned with the guys over at Brew Hoop, and Van is going to join us to go through some more of the cap minutia, and we're working through more of a visual component for this, for the people, for all the viewers on YouTube to kind of see the cap sheet and plug and play and drop in players to see, okay, here's what this means. So we're going to get into that sometime next week as well. And as we mentioned, we'll have a show the day of the deadline, just after the deadline, to recap what happened, what it means for the Bucks, even if it wasn't a move by the Bucks, what other teams' moves mean for the Milwaukee Bucks. So leave your thoughts in the comments. The number one position for the Bucks to target here as we move into the deadline. And yes, would you take Jimmy Butler, as Camille mentioned? That'll
also
do it.
Also leave your birthday wishes for Justin in the comments, y'all. Happy birthday, Justin. Woo woo!
That will do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.